Hi guys, it's Randy Baker from Composition and Visual Design. Just wanted to go through a quick white balance video for you. Some of you were saying that you were having problems with the video from week one. That's a Dropbox video. I've checked it on several computers. It seems to be working, but I'm just going to go through this white balance video for you anyway, just so that everybody will kind of have a pretty good understanding. So first, a couple things. You have lots of references out there for you on the white balance. If you look in week one, there's an article called the FS5 Technical Guide that goes through white balancing for you. There's this great article in the camera information there called the Zen of White Balancing, which goes through the workflow, which I really want you to do. And this is a workflow. I'm going to teach you how to basically white balance the camera, and then I'm going to teach you a workflow to really teach you how to get the most out of white balance. But and also you've got a camera manual, and in your camera manual on page 52, I believe, it's called Adjusting the Color Tone. It walks you through how to white balance here too. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to white balance this camera. We're going to concentrate on two of them: custom and manual. Now, in your menu setup, we had you go in and we had you change your white balance preset under the camera paint menu. We had you change that to color temperature. And that white balance preset means that preset switch on the side of your camera. This little preset switch right here on the right side of your camera. I'm upside down, so I have to kind of look at that. If you can see that, it's right there. So that's the preset switch, A, B, and preset. A, B are custom white balance presets, and manual white balance. So we had you change that from outdoor. Now, Sony has two other white balance settings, outdoors and indoors, which are kind of consumer settings. Once you have them set into those settings, you can change your white balance -7 to +7. There's no scientific reason behind it. It's just, it's more like a consumer model. So we don't use that in this class. What we are using is white balance, manual white balance temperature. And when you have that set there, and you have the switch on the side of your camera set to preset, it throws up a Kelvin degree number, which is what we're going to be talking about. So just make sure you understand that you can go through this on pages 52 and 53, and then in 54 it tells you how to use white balance on there, and your camera manual. Don't forget to read the camera manual. It's not going to make sense to you the first time you read it, but the more you shoot with the camera, shoot with the camera for a week, then read the camera manual. Then shoot with the camera for a week and read the camera manual. Then shoot with the camera for a week and read the camera manual. You get the idea. So what happens is that everything starts to make sense after a while. You read something and you go, I have no idea what they're talking about. Then you play with the camera and say, oh, that's what it is. And then go back to read the manual and you go, oh, that reinforces what you just learned. So let's start off by talking, first of all, about what white balance is. So the human eye is what's called color adaptive, meaning that if you see something white outside, like this is your white card that came with your camera, this is in the side of your camera pouch on your camera bag. If you take this white card outside and look at it, it looks white to you. If you bring it inside and look at it, it looks white to you. Why? Because your eyes are connected to this supercomputer called the brain, a couple inches behind your eyes, and it's very, very intelligent. It's saying to your eyes, that's white. We know it's white. We're going to make it white no matter what color temperature you're under, whether you're under the sun or under tungsten light. It's going to be white. Your camera's not that smart. As a matter of fact, your camera's dumb. Dumb as a box of bricks. It's basically just a box with a hole in it. So you have to tell the camera what white is every location you go to. You have to tell what black is, because black is a null color. It doesn't change at all. You only have to black balance every now and then. If you had the camera off for a month or so, if you've gone in from extreme temperatures, extreme cold to extreme heat, or extreme heat to extreme cold, or you change the lens. Sony recommends you black balance the camera, and that's a menu setting that you have to go in. But every location you go to, you got a white balance. So since all four of the shots you're doing in the first couple weeks are all different, you got to have 4 different white balances in those 4 different shots, because they can't be in the same place. So when you start shooting your short film, you only white balance for that location. So if you go into the kitchen and set a white balance, it stays the same for the entire duration that you're in that kitchen, unless the lighting has changed dramatically. Same thing with outdoors. If you set an outdoor white balance, it stays the same unless you set it for the sun and now you're shooting in the shade, then you'd have to change it. So just keep that in mind. So it's called color adaptive, and your eye isn't. So what you're doing is you're basically telling the camera, make white this. And so you're doing it as a reference. And the easiest way to do that is to point the camera at something white and have it in the switch in A or B, which are custom white balance modes. Now, those two switches, A and B, are just same thing. They're just memory banks, and all they're doing is storing a white balance a Kelvin degree number in there that you've set up, that you point the camera at. So the easiest way to white balance this camera, for those of you who don't want to go much further than this, is you simply switch this switch to AB, to A or B from preset, preferably A, and then you zoom in to something white, preferably your white card. That's a standardized white reference source. And then you hit this button on the side of the camera called Push Auto. See this little button right here called Push Auto, right below the iris button? That, if you push and hold that button, you'll look at your f-stop number in the viewfinder, you will see that the number gets a A in front of it. Let me extend this out so you can see this. Come on, you can do it. There we go. Okay, now you can see it much better. So if you this is your AB preset switch. You have three buttons, two buttons and a switch that control white balance. The first one is this switch right here, the AB preset. See that switch? AB preset. A and B are custom, preset is manual, and the second one is this white balance button. All this white balance button does is take you in and out of auto and manual white balance. Look underneath the audio meters. Let me put some ND in so I bring this down. Look underneath the audio meter. See where it says A? When I flip that switch to B, or flip it from, see it disappeared? That's because I hit the white balance button. See it come back? So when I do this, let me pull out so you can see, look at the viewfinder. So when I flip this switch from preset, or it's on A right now, let me turn it. I put it to preset, you see a Kelvin degree number there. A, I see an A there, it's blinking. B, I see a B there. So I'm not sure why the A was blinking, to be honest with you. That's kind of weird. Never seen it do that before. But so when you flip that switch, now this white balance button right here, if I push that white balance button, you see the A disappears. Now it appears again, it disappears again. Same thing with preset. If I push that button, now I have a Kelvin degree number, now I don't. So you have to see something underneath your audio meter, A, B, or preset. So B, A, preset. Again, I'm not sure why A is doing that. So when you look at that, that's what you have to see. If you don't see anything under your audio meter there, that means you're in auto white balance and you don't want to be in auto white balance. Now the other button you need to know is right here on the front of the camera. Right here, it's called the white balance set button, WB set button. See that button? So those two buttons in that one switch control white balance for you. So what you do, go back up here and you flip your switch to A. Put this switch to A. Now it's on A. You make sure that you can see A in your viewfinder, but you can't, so you just go up here and push your WB set button, or your white balance button, and A appears. Now you point the camera at something white, so let me see if I can do this. I'm just going to point it at some of these white cabinets, bookcases that I have here. Let's see, I'll actually try to put a white card up here so that I can see this. There we go. Let me lean it up against that. So now you can see this. So now you can see I'm going to point this at the white card. So I point it at the white card, and then on the side of the camera here, there's a button called Push Auto. Right there. Now when I point that and push it at that, it automatically irises down for me. And if you can see the f-stop number on your viewfinder, while I'm holding that in, it has a in front of it. See it down in the right underneath the mirror where it says mirror? If I let go of that, it goes back. So I'm basically pointing that at the card and then white balancing or auto irising, holding that button in, and it tells me that I irised. Now that I did that, let me move this back so I can move it closer so you can see. Now if I point that at the white card, I'm doing all this backwards, so bear with me. And the white card just fell. I point that at the white card. I make sure that I'm exposed properly. Let me see the button. There we go. I got a little bit more glare on it right now, so let me make sure I'm exposed properly. May have to dial in some ND filter because it's pretty bright in here. Push auto button. Let me find it again. Too much. Maybe 1. There we go. Hit my push auto button. Here we go. Push auto, exposes down, and then on the front of the camera it's still not exposing enough. Okay, where'd the card go? One, two. Okay. Let me find the card here. There we go. I'm going to push it till exposed, and then I'm going to hit I'm going to hit the WB set button on the front of the camera. And when I do that, you see the A turns to a Kelvin degree number, but it changes. In 3 seconds, it changes. Let me try it over here. That might be a little bit better. Bring the microphone out of the way so that you can actually see it. So, now, pointing at the card, I hit my push auto button. And you always just want to make sure you're exposed properly, because if you're overexposed, I'm going to bring this down. So I want to make sure I'm in auto. Here we go. Push auto. You find it. Well, there's something right there. So I'm going to make sure I'm exposed properly. Let me just take a look at that. And then I'm going to hit the WB set button on the front of the camera. If I can find it. Right there. Okay. Hit the WB set button and look at that A. I'm going to keep the A there. Watch the A underneath the audio meters. So when I hit that, you see it changes to a Kelvin degree number. But it only stays a Kelvin degree number for 3 seconds before it reverts back to the A. So that's the easiest way to white balance this camera. You're pointing at something white, you make sure you're exposed properly in A or B switch, and then you hit the WB set button on the front of the camera. You got to make sure you see an A in the viewfinder. And what you're doing there is you're letting the camera tell you what it thinks white balance should be based on that white reference you're shooting and the lighting you're shooting under. It's that simple. So there's no excuse for bad white balance. All you got to do is point it at something white, make sure you're exposed properly, have it the switch in A or B, hit the WB set button, and the camera automatically tells you what white balance is. Now, you got to make sure that you write that number down, again, because A and B only stay on the screen for 3 seconds as a Kelvin degree number before they revert back to A and B. So that's pretty easy to do. So again, A and B are just memory banks. So the way you would do that, lots of different things you would use it for. In this class, we're using it to teach you subtle differences between 100 or 200 degrees white balance. So in reality, out in the field, you would use it if you were shooting indoors, and then if you're doing a documentary, for example, and you were following somebody outside into a house. So instead of having to stop and change white balance once you get in the house, before you start shooting, you set your white balance for the inside of the house on B and the white balance for the outside of the house on A. And then as you're walking with the character through the door, you simply switch the switch from A to B, and voila, your white balance for the indoor white balance on B. So that's one of the ways to use it. There are many ways to do that. Or what we're going to be using it for is so that you can understand the subtle differences between 100 or 200 degrees Kelvin. Because here's the deal. If you just set one white balance number, because your eye is color adaptive, your eye is going to look at that and go, oh, that looks good. You know, you don't have any reference to base it on. So you don't have any real reference to what to base that on. So if you set a couple of them and then switch back and forth, you will be able to see subtle differences in the white. And what we're doing with that workflow then is retraining your eye to really look at those subtle differences and go, oh, that's really quite different. Okay, so if you take the camera now and you put the switch to preset. If you flip that all the way down to preset, now you see there's a Kelvin degree number under the viewfinder, right here under the viewfinder, right there, Kelvin degree number. If you hit the WB set button, it puts a white box around that Kelvin degree number. Now, as you know, anytime you have a white box around the Kelvin degree number, you can adjust that number by using this multifunction toggle switch on the back right here on your handle. There's that little black multifunction toggle switch right below the record button right there, or by using the set select dial right here on the side of your camera. So you can actually dial that number up and down. It's a little blown out on this, but if you were seeing it, you could actually tell that. So There are a couple color temperature numbers Kelvin degree numbers that you need to remember. And so when you have the switch in preset, you see a Kelvin degree number under the audio meters where the white balance information is. As soon as you hit the WB set button, that puts a white box around that number, and then you can dial it up and down using the multifunction toggle switch on the right handle, back of the right handle, or the set select dial on the left side of the camera. And what you're trying to do is dial that number in so that in the LCD, the white balance looks just like it does to you with your eye. So you probably want to zoom out a little bit so you have a little bit wider shot so you can see something white. Now, a couple things to get you in the ballpark. First of all, 3 numbers. I told you to remember these 3 numbers. 3200 degrees Kelvin, which is your tungsten light kit. If you're using just your tungsten light kit in a room, it's probably going to be 3200 degrees Kelvin. That's the color temperature of those bulbs. 5600 degrees Kelvin, which is direct sun outside, not a cloud in the sky. 6500 degrees Kelvin, which is partly overcast, cloudy skies. So if you are in those types of shooting situations, you can dial the preset white balance into those to get you in the ballpark, but you don't want to leave it there. You still want to dial it up and down 100 degrees Kelvin. You may have to go 400 or 500 degrees up or 400 or 500 degrees down below that number to get it to look good in your viewfinder. Again, you're trying to make it look in your viewfinder like just like what you see with your human eye, and you got to retrain your eye to do that. You think you know what white is, but honestly right now you don't. So another way to do that is, we do a workflow, and the workflow is you take your white card and you switch your camera to A, and you put your white card under the main light. Right now I have overhead lights coming in, so I put it on my overhead light. I zoom into the card with this on A, hit the push auto button to make sure I'm not overexposed, to expose properly. Then I hit the WB set button, and that A would change to a Kelvin degree number. I'd write that down in my camera report under A. And then I take the camera card and I take it away from my main light source, like away from it, and I would zoom into it, flip the switch to B now, zoom into that card. You want to fill at least 80% of the screen with the card, and then I would hit the WB set button again, and that would change, B would change to a Kelvin degree number. Now it should be a couple hundred degrees different because you're not shooting under that direct light. Now you can also, you should experiment with B. So you don't have to use the white card. You can just pick something else white in the room that's close under the lighting you're shooting and white balance off that. And I may do 4 or 5 different white balances off of B until I'm happy with what I see with B looking like. And then I'll move to preset and I'll dial that in. Now sometimes if I get like 3200 on A and 3600 on B, I'll simply just dial my preset into 3400 right between those. And then once I have that number set up in my preset, then I zoom back out and set up my shot, and then I'd flip back and forth between A, B, and preset on the switch and look at it and determine which one of those 3 numbers looks the best. Now again, you got to write down all 3 of those numbers in your camera report, and you got to do it as you're shooting because you'll never remember it if you don't. And I will know because you're not smart enough yet to make those numbers up. So once you flip back and forth and determine the one that looks the best to you, you simply bold or highlight that in your camera report so I know that's the one you chose. If you don't bold or highlight it, I can't give you the type of feedback that I need to give you back because I don't know which one you use. So it's really that simple. So that's how you white balance this camera. Again, there's no reason to have bad white balance. All you got to do is point the camera at something white, make sure you're exposed properly in A or B, hit the WB set button, and voila, the camera tells you what you need. Now, in your camera reports for weeks 1, 2, and 3, you have to write down, or week 1, 2, and 4, you have to write down A, B, and preset. And you have to bold or change the color of the one that you chose. If you don't do that, that's a point off for everyone you don't do. So you can lose a lot of points on that in your camera reports. Again, I can't stress this enough. Make sure you're writing that stuff down as you shoot. Have your camera report on a clipboard or something. Write that stuff down because you will forget it and it will cost you a lot of points. So that's as simple as it gets with white balance. So now that you know how to do that, let's talk a little bit about theory. And this is where this article comes in. So to really understand white balance, you got to understand color temperature. And color temperature is the temperature of light. It's not a heat thing. It's a temperature of light. And so if you read this, is the light source is temperature of an ideal black body radiator. What they're talking about is a lump of coal or a carbon fiber black brick. Think about it that way. As you put heat to that, it changes colors. And a good analogy is a chunk of charcoal in your a barbecue. You know, as you heat that up, it turns red at first, and then as it gets really, really hot, it goes white. If you continue to heat that up enough, it would eventually turn blue, but you can't heat it up that much in your charcoal. So that's color temperature. You know, it has nothing to do with the heat. It's just about the color. Now, we measure color temperature in something called Kelvin degrees. And Kelvin degrees is one of the 7 standards of measurement that we use in everyday life, including like weight and mass and, you know, temperature and pica. Pica is like H2O. That's a pica. So there are 7 of them, but again, a lot of them, like the H2O pica, we don't use. And color temperature, quite frankly, we don't use. So you're not used to Kelvin degrees. But Kelvin degrees are how we rate color temperature. And again, it's one of 7 standards of measurement that we use in everyday life. And here's a typical, color temperature goes from about 1,000 to 10,000. If you're getting color temperature readings of about 10,000, you're probably not exposing it properly. You're probably overexposed or probably not underexposed or overexposed. And there's some tips I'll give you about how to use this white card to help you prevent that going on. So, you know, about 1,700 degrees Kelvin is the match flame. About 1,800 to 1,900 is a candlestick. A 40 watt, 60 watt, or 100 watt incandescent bulb in your table lamp is going to be anywhere between 2,400 and about 2,700, depending on whether it's a soft light or a blue light, daylight light. 3,200 degrees Kelvin is your tungsten light kit, studio lamps and photo floods, not daylight photo floods, but tungsten photo floods. And then 5,500 to 6,000 is blue scale, direct sun daylight. Also, electronic flashes are that color temperature. And then 6,500 degrees Kelvin is partly overcast, cloudy sky days. Also, your TVs, your watches, your computer screens, and your computers, or your, are all the screens are balanced at 6,500. So you got to know that if you're lighting inside and you're shooting a computer with somebody there and they've got their hands in front of it, if you white balance for the tungsten light you're using at 3,200, your screen's going to look blue. If you white balance for the screen, your hands are going to look orange. So you kind of realize that. So you got to know what color temperature is. And the easiest way to do that is go out and look at some infographics. Now, I'm a big fan of infographics, and for those of you who don't know what infographics are, they're basically just charts, single-page charts that kind of tell you information on that. So if you go into Google and you type in, let's do this so that you see how this is. I'm just going to type this in and hit Google Home, and I'm going to type in color temperature infographics. You can do charts, play around with it. And so then you go up here and look at images. And when you look at images, you will see a ton of, literally hundreds of infographics about color temperature. Now, not all of them are great. There are a couple of them that are out there that are really pretty good. This one is great. It walks you through what all of these are. And you can see it goes from about 1,700 all the way up to 10,000. Again, if you're going over 10,000, you're probably doing something wrong. Here's another good one. Here's another one of my favorites that I really kind of like that goes through it. But you'll see there's tons of information out there on color temperature and how to read it. So just make sure that you go through and read this. And then if you go up here, there's all kinds of tabs where you can go through color temperature scale explained. And here's what we're talking about: auto white balance and presets. Presets are the manuals. Auto white balancers are your A and B custom white balancing. Well, it's not really. AWB or auto trace white balance, ATW, which you may see on your camera every now and then if you're in the direct mode, means that you're in auto white balance. You don't want to be ever in auto white balance. So you can go in and look at, again, there's all these great infographics that are out there that will take you through all this different stuff. You can see there's tons on photography, and here's one on the ISO scale, and here's one on how to read Instagram, which I use a lot. This is a really good one. And here's one that explains color temperature. So if you go out there and kind of find these, again, I want you to go out and kind of research these on your own because I think it's important for you to kind of understand this stuff. So just make sure that you go through and look at those. And there's, like I said, there's a ton of them. These are kind of my favorite ones, but if you look in here, you can see all kinds of different ones that will go through different types of things. And again, what you're going to find is that some of these are slightly different. You'll find different numbers for those, so just be aware of that. But I'll kind of go through again. The basics are like about 1800, little under 2000 is candlelight. Tungsten lights, are your light kit is 3200. If you're using a 60 or 100 watt incandescent bulb, that's going to be about 2800 degrees. If you're outside using under direct daylight, from about 10 o'clock in the morning till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, not the cloud in the sky, it's going to be 5600 degrees Kelvin, pretty much without doubt. And then if you're in the sun, direct sunlight, if you're in the shade, that kind of changes. The shade will go down to more around 4000 degrees. And then if you are on a partly cloudy sky, 6500 degrees Kelvin. So just remember those three numbers, 32, 56, and 65, and that will get you in the ballpark. So let's take a look at this again. Read this article. This goes through everything with you, all the different color temperatures. Here's the three numbers again. I want you to commit those to memories. Here's how to do the Sony FS5 white balancing with the A/B switch that I just walked you through. I give you the settings. I talked to you about the outdoor and indoor ones that you shouldn't use. And then the white balance and the human eye, I talk about the color adaptive white balance. And then here's the workflow that I want you to follow through. Here's what you got to follow. This is it. And then a couple tips on there. Your white reference. Again, why you should use your white reference for A always, your white card, and then use different things for B. And then the type of lighting you're going to be shooting under and making sure that you're exposed properly. And you got to fill about 80% of the frame. So you want to get like this much of the frame filled with the white card or whatever you're shooting white. And then I walk you through how to do that, exactly how to do that. And then here's the second part of the workflow. Set the white balance switch to A, B, and presets. So I take you through A and then B and then preset. And then why we do that. Again, the reason we do that is it retrains your eye to look at subtle differences in white. Now, here's a couple cool things that you should try. So if you get like 3200 indoors with your tungsten light kit for A, and then you flip it, shoot a wall or something in the room, and you get 3600 for B, and you flip the preset in and you dial into the 34 right between those, and you're clicking back and forth, and you think A looks best at 3200, go back to preset and change the preset to be 3200 as well. And then when you flip back and forth between A and B or A and preset, even though those are the same numbers, look at those and you will see that they're different colors, even though it's exactly the same Kelvin degree number. Why is that? Well, it's pretty simple. When you custom white balance this camera under A and B, the camera goes through and it changes all kinds of different electronics within the camera, all kinds of different settings, almost 24 settings to be exact. When you simply dial in a preset number, a Kelvin degree number, you're dialing in probably 7 or 8 different settings, and that's it. So there's a little bit different. So purists will tell you to get the best white balance, really, you have to use A and B, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to null out all the tint in color, so everything doesn't have any tint in it. That's exactly what you're trying to do. So that's an interesting thing to do, to try to make sure you do that. Now, when you first start white balancing with this camera, most people tend to use A and B, primarily A, because why? Well, you're white balancing under the main light source that you're going to be shooting under with a standardized white card. So, that's pretty much the white balance that it should be. But you got to use your human eye. You got to use your eye to make the final judgment on that. Now, the other thing to think about is as you get better at this, you're going to find yourself using preset more and more. Why is that? Well, it's pretty simple. It's a lot of common sense, because you can almost use white balance like painting with light. Roger Deakins, who's one of my favorite DPs, who did Shawshank Redemption and The Big Lebowski and the last James Bond and the last Blade Runner, and I mean the list of his films go on and on. The guy is a brilliant guy. He was also the last big DP to switch from 35mm film to digital cinematography. He just didn't want to shoot in digital cinematography. And so once he did, the thing that blew him away, out of all the great things about digital cinematography, the one thing that blew him away more than anything was that he could actually change his white balance by 100 degrees Kelvin. You can't do that in film. So he was like, my God, it's like being able to paint with white balance. And so that's the whole key. So as you get good at understanding white balance and how to use white balance, and especially Kelvin degrees, you can use that to control the mood and tone of your shot. For example, if you're shooting a Dos Equis commercial out on the beach and you want the beach to look a little warmer, you simply dial down your white balance degree, Kelvin degree number, a couple hundred degrees Kelvin, and it makes it look warmer. If you're shooting the Yeti cooler commercial out in the snow and you want to make it look colder, you would simply dial up your white balance a couple hundred degrees Kelvin to make it look a little bluer. So you can actually use that. And if you go into your infographics and start looking, what are the things that you're going to find, especially for if you go up here and you go, let's see, under understanding, there's all kinds of things about understanding this. There's all kinds of tutorials, but one of the things that you're going to find, see if I can see it real fast off the top of my head, is that a lot of interior designers use lighting, and what they use lighting for is to create specific moods. So you'll find some charts that will actually have the Kelvin degree numbers, which of course I'm not going to find now that I'm looking for it, but I have them saved, where they talk about what each of those things do, whether, the incandescent bulbs, create more of a warm, inviting feeling, while the 5600 daylight is more of a clean and crisp feeling and stuff. So they really think about it in those terms. So when you start thinking about white balance, you got to think about it in terms of that kind of creative mood as well. This is one of the things that you need to really kind of concentrate on. So that's basically it, and then at the very end of this, the same thing in the FS5, there's some things called warm cards, which you don't really need because you can actually go in and dial those in. A lot of cameras will not let you dial in custom white balancing, preset white balances, 100 degrees Kelvin at a time. You're stuck with like 3 or 4 different settings. The other thing I want to talk to you about is you can use gray. So always try to white balance under A with your white card. B, white balance off of everything. I've white balanced off of dogs. I've white balanced off of cars, off of buildings, off of doors, off of garages, off of sidewalks, off of streets, off of anything gray. Anything gray will work just as well as white. Oftentimes better. So I constantly, like I said, when I'm in B, I may white balance 5 or 6 different things around me in the area that I'm shooting, just to get a good feel of what looks good to me. And then I'll go back to my A and my B and look at those along with preset. So just know that. Make sure you black balance your camera, every now and then. Read your camera manual, direct menu, white balance. You can go into the back of the sign button number 5 is something called direct menu. And if you learn how to use direct menu, you will find that sometimes if you're in white balance and you're cycling through the white balance information and direct menu, you will see the little sun and the little light bulb icon and something that says ATW. This ATW down here. ATW is auto white balance. You don't want to be there, and you don't want to be in the outdoor, the little sun, or the indoor, the little incandescent bulb. So just make sure you go back to Kelvin degrees or the A or B when you're in the direct menu, the sign button number 5 on this camera. So that's it. Again, don't forget to read your camera manual, and I highly would recommend that you go out. Here's the thing about white balance, we looked at all the infographic things, but if you go in there and look at video instead of images, there are 5,420 articles on color, temperature, and white balancing. So if you just type in white balance for cinematography, and look in there, you will see all kinds of tutorials. There are 32,000 tutorials. If you look at all, you will see there are 262,000 things about white balance and color temperature, from all kinds of different things. Now, you got to be careful because there's a lot of bad information out there. But if you go back in and look at your vault in week 1, I actually have some nice information, and I'm in the process of updating that now. So just make sure. It's like shooting, and lighting and shooting and white balance are all pretty much the same. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. But again, if you read that FS5 technical guide, what you're going to find is at the end of that, I give you some tips about how to use your white card. You don't want the glare. See that glare on there? You want to tilt it down so you make sure that you don't have any glare on it. If you take this white card and one of your soft lights into a room like a kitchen with the daylight coming through one of the windows and an overhead lamp, and you spend an hour in there doing this A/B preset workflow where you just use your tungsten light, then shut that off and just use the window light, and then close the window and just use the overhead light, and then do mixtures of all 3 of those lights, Within an hour, you'll master white balance. Again, make sure you're doing A, B, and preset. You're writing all three of those numbers down, and make sure you bold or highlight the number that you use. Otherwise, you'll get 5 points taken off. That camera reports. You can get a grade and a half taken off your camera reports that are that important. So make sure you understand how to do that.